Please welcome editor at Huffington Post, Chris Rosen, and tonight's guest, filmmaker and actor, Edward Burns.
Thank you. How you doing?
Hello. Yikes. So, nice to have you here at the Apple Store and stuff. We just watched the trailer for that. It's a great movie. I watched it last night. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So, I know, I've seen you say that it's a very personal film and stuff. I mean, what was the impetus for, like, the script and stuff? And, how did it all come together?
A couple of different things. I'd worked, some people probably have heard this story, I worked with Tyler Perry over the summer. Tyler had rewatched Brothers McMullen and basically said, why is it that in 15 years you've never returned to the Irish-American working class milieu of your first two films? And he said, look at what I'm doing. You should think about super serving your niche. The audience that liked those first two films, if you made another one, probably would thank you for it. And I thought, he's right. Why haven't I gone back to sort of re-explore that world and those themes? So I sat down, I opened up my laptop, I just wrote Interior of the Fitzgerald's Kitchen Day, started writing, and I didn't know where the story was going to go. But I had some loose idea that I wanted to do something about a big Irish-American family. I have a friend who's one of 9, another friend who's one of 12. They've always told me these crazy stories about what it was like to grow up in a big house like that. So that was sort of my launching off spot. I guess that was it.
Right, okay. Yeah. And I know with your last film, Newlyweds, it kind of came together really quickly because I remember I saw it closed Tribeca, and you kind of put that together in almost like a few months, it seemed like. So with this one, was the process a lot longer? I mean, how did...
Newlyweds, our intention with that film was we wanted to try and make a super micro budgeted film. We shot it on the 5D. We did a 3-man crew. The whole idea was, we're going to work with something resembling a screenplay, but, much more of, script, but a lot of scenes just outlined and kind of let's explore the thing as we went. This, given that it was so personal, so close to home, I did not want to attempt that. I wanted to go in with a finished screenplay, and also the shooting style of this film. We wanted to make sort of a sort of more classic film. So, we spent a lot of time. My DP and I, William Rexer, sometimes you'll think about all right, given what the story is, given the tone, the themes. What is the look that we want to go after, and are there other films or filmmakers that have done that? And we kind of thought that Sidney Lumet was a guy that we should take a look at. And when we were screening some of his early films, we came across Prince of the City, which we had both loved. But in that, Lumet's style is, it's very straightforward. I mean, it's classic compositions, not a hell of a lot of camera movement, and a lot of it takes place in suburban working class living rooms, kitchens, bedrooms. So we thought, all right, this is an interesting kind of palette for us to sort of work from. That said, so a much longer process getting the film ready and getting it up.
Right. And I mean, you like that, I'm sure you like that, going back and forth between styles and stuff, because it is a lot, and even the editing on this is a lot different than it was in Newlyweds, because you had the husbands and wives jump cuts and stuff in that one, and this one it's a lot more, the scenes are playing out. I just think it's kind of cool.
My stuff tonally can pretty much all be the same. It's like I'm not the kind of a filmmaker that likes to jump from genre to genre. I like, they say about jazz musicians, you got to own your tone. I kind of like my tone. That said, with those kind of dialogue-heavy, character-driven personal stories, we don't really get to do much. And also, when you're making micro-budgeted films or low-budget films, you don't get to play with the camera the way, the big guys do, if you will. So it's a matter of just finding sort of the little shifts that you can play with.
Right. So when you're writing this, I mean, obviously, you've seen the trailer there. It brings together a lot of people who've been in your films before, both Mike and Connie from the early stuff, and then Carrie and Caitlin Fitzgerald and from the newer stuff. So I mean, when you're writing this, are you writing for these actors, or are you hoping that they'll all do it? I mean, how did that work? I want Mike. I'd love Mike to play this part, or Connie would be great for this. I mean, how does that work for you?
I think sometimes I'm writing with a specific actor in mind. Sometimes I'm writing and I think, all right, there are 2 or 3 different characters that maybe Carrie Bechet could play. And then during the process, you start to sort of hone in on the one that, all right, this is going to be right for Carrie, this will be right for Caitlin. With this film, I mentioned those two because I definitely was writing for those two. And then I'd also spoke a couple of months earlier with Mike McMullen about potentially, I had started to think about a Brothers McMullen sequel.
Right.
So I started to talk to Mike about that. I mentioned this other thing that I was working on, Fitzgerald, and he said, well, why wait till then? Why don't we work together sooner? And I thought, great. So I started to write that part for him. Then when I had them, because the film is about a family reunion, I thought, let me take a look at all the films I've done. I've done 10 films now. And why don't we make the casting sort of like my filmmaking family reunion? And we went through every film that I've made and cast at least one actor from every film. And I think there's maybe 2 or 3 actors in the whole piece that I had never worked with before. But everybody else is our old friends. And it's kind of the added bonus we got from that is the fact that the minute we started to shoot, you got the sense that these people had some real history.
Right.
And that's due to the fact that people like Mike McMullen and Anita Gillette, who's also in She's the One, they've known one another for 17 years.
Right.
Carrie and Caitlin have become great friends. So while they're not siblings, they do have real friendships and real history.
And I think, this is probably going to sound crazy, but I also think it helps that they all kind of, based on that chemistry, it's almost like they're related. They look, you just start to think they look like related. It's like this is believably a family, which is fun, I think. At least, for, like I said, I could be completely crazy for thinking that, but they do kind of look alike.
It gets even weirder because someone said on set that Anita Gillette looks kind of like my mom.
Okay.
And then someone said like Ed Lauder, who plays the father, it was like his mannerisms were similar to my dad. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll use one of my parents' old photographs in the film. And then instead I thought, well, years ago I cut together their wedding footage. Maybe there's a place to use that in the film. So in that clip where they, I wrote that scene late, after we were already on set and I was seeing the similarities and worked it in that way.
Right. Now, I know we don't have that clip, but we do have a clip of Caitlin and Carrie in the car.
And Tom Gyrie.
Right. And I think we could run that. That'd be great.
So you can tell it's not Love Actually. It's not that kind of Christmas movie.
But you were saying, we were talking about this before this started, and how that's that's a key scene in the film, and it really kind of speaks to, the theme is really forgiveness, and also kind of how, I think how anger takes different forms as different ages. Like they're the youngest, Carrie and I'm sorry.
Yeah, Tom.
And they have the most anger towards their father, and kind of as it goes up the line, it's a little more understanding, which I thought was really interesting as well.
Yeah, I mentioned some of my childhood friends who came from these big families. There was another friend of mine who came from a big family that talked about his older siblings hated their father because when they were born, the father was 21 and a drunk, and they had no money, and he beat the shit out of them. And by the time numbers 7, 8, 9 showed up, he had gotten sober, educated, and was making money, and the younger kids thought he was the greatest dad in the world. So I just love the idea that under one roof, in one family, you could have 2 very different sets of parents, different sets of relationships, and just different feelings about your parents. And that's kind of where I jumped off from. And the other thing that I wanted to look at with Christmas is Christmas is always that time where friends of mine will say, if you could just get through the holidays and not have that conversation, if that thing doesn't come up. Kerry says in here, it's all right, I forgive you, I don't want to talk about it. You just want to get through without the ugly stuff potentially coming up. But, the movie, as I said, it's about forgiveness and healing. And the thinking was, in order to heal, you got to sort of address the wounds. So the movie, you got 7 siblings and everybody's got some wounds.
Right. And the other thing I liked about it as a viewer is, I feel like, takes place over a few days, which I always think that's always I love when movies take place over a few days. But the other, it doesn't really pander to the audience. You don't over explain things. There's history with this family and stuff. And I don't, do you think that you're able to do that because it's independent and not a studio production. Because I've seen, not naming names, but I've seen films that I've loved this year that kind of have done that hand-holding thing where there's like someone's talking about gambling and then all of a sudden we're going to go to like explain what the term is. Like it's almost like kind of like you could just hear that studio note where they're like, this needs to be explained because the audience is not going to pay attention or follow this. So, I mean, do you find that kind of freeing when you're writing as like, you don't have to necessarily worry about studio influence as much, let's say?
I mean, it's the reason that I make the, I've stayed independent all these years. I constantly talk about, there are two lists of compromises like a filmmaker has to work off of. The compromises you make when you make lower budgeted or micro budget films like me is, you're gonna have to make a film in 20 days or 15 days. You're not gonna have, Steadicam and 50 feet of track and cranes. You're not going to work with movie stars, and if you're not going to work with movie stars, odds are you're not going to get a major theatrical release. There are going to be certain things that let's say your production may suffer from. The plus side that you get is you don't get those notes. You work with the actors you want to work with, and you get to make the film that you want to make. The other list of compromises when you do get a lot of money, you get all those things that I talked about, all the toys and the stars and everyone gets paid very well, but you don't get to make your film. You don't get to make personal films. So it's really just what kind of filmmaking are you interested in?
Right, and for this point of view, I mean, at least you still get you do have stars. Connie Britton is a huge star.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
fortunately,
right, for you're in a because you've been doing it so long, it's a nice position. Yeah. We mentioned that kind of like independent thing. You've been doing really well with the on-demand and stuff, and like kind of been, I feel like, a trailblazer in that, or at least out in front, like where your films have really been playing to that home audience and like finding an audience and doing really well. I mean, where do you see that market going in like where do you see that going next? Like, what's the next step for on-demand viewing?
I don't know. I mean, all I know is that the audience, a younger audience is totally comfortable watching films on their devices and seem to have no problem with it. And now, more and more sort of, let's say, older folks, like even like my dad now, like is addicted to Netflix on his iPad, which is something that, 2 years ago, he and I, no one in our house could fathom that. So I think the world is changing. I think the big change that will come is some version of the direct-to-consumer sale. If you look at what, I guess starting with, Radiohead was probably the first band that did it with In Rainbows, I think was the name of that record. And 9 Inch Nails had a lot of success with it. And now tons of bands do it. And then Louis C.K. most famously recently did that. I think you're going to start to see, not only just indie films, but there's going to be some version of that where that middleman is cut out. I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, and I think that's probably fun for the consumer, at least. Also,
it's fun for the consumer. I think it's fun for the whether it's the musician or the comedian or the filmmaker.
So you've done now 11 films. I mean, how do you feel like, and you've obviously directed and acted, and how do you feel you've developed as an actor yourself? Because I think you're really good in this, and I mean, how have you developed, how have you learned to direct yourself? I know that's tricky. I know when like Ben Affleck was going around talking about Argo, he was like, that was a very popular question to him, I guess. I mean, how have you developed as an actor under your own direction?
I mean, I think I've been lucky as an actor in Hollywood films that I've gotten to work with, some really good filmmakers and got to work opposite some really great actors. And, I never had any ego about going up to a Dustin Hoffman and saying, all right, how did I do in that scene? Where did it work? Where didn't it work? And, talking to them about, how I might become a better actor. So that's a great bonus to have. But for me, in my films, I'm lucky. I have the guy that has produced all of my movies since Sidewalks of New York, a guy named Aaron Lubin. That's, we're going on 12 or 13 years working together. And my director of photography, a guy named Will Rexer. I think this is our 7th film together. Before we go into production, we kind of identify the scenes that are going to be more of a challenge for me as an actor, or where let's say I'm out of my comfort zone. If I'm playing a sarcastic asshole, I can kind of, I know how to hit those beats. But, like a scene in this film with Connie Britton and I in the car, that was a pretty tricky scene, and that I kind of hand over the reins to them on those scenes and say, look, it's up to you to let me know whether or not we get this. And they're both, they've both been with me a long time, and they're both, real students of film and could direct their own movies,
Right.
I'm sure.
And I know we probably have to start taking questions soon, but do you want to maybe run that other clip of Ed and Mike? We have one more.
Yeah.
I just thought of it. It's a good scene. I get, first part about that. Was it hard to get clearance for all the Christmas songs in this? Because you do have a lot in there. Was that difficult?
What we did was, when we were thinking about what Christmas tunes to use, we went online and looked what Christmas songs are in the public domain.
Okay.
And there's about 4 or 5 dozen very well-known Christmas songs.
Yeah.
So then my composer, P.T. Walkley, and I, in the film, you probably got some sense. It's, there's some comedic moments in it, but it is not a comedy. I mean, it's more a melancholy tale, like a heartfelt and sort of sad ending.
Yeah.
So thinking about that, we were like, all right, well, we should embrace that. So we went through those tunes and thought, well, what are, it's funny, most Christmas songs are pretty melancholy.
Right.
So we had a lot to choose from. And then we just picked the ones that PT and I sort of thought fit the film, I guess, thought best matched the tone of the film. And then he went in and did his score. And then we had, maybe there's 7 or 8 moments in bars and things where we needed some other tunes. And that we went out to our friends who are musicians and said, here's the 12 songs that you can pick from. Would you mind just going in and doing a version for us?
Right.
So that was pretty lucky.
Yeah. And then working with Mike again, obviously you have not worked him on screen in a while. I know you did the short film at Tribeca this year with him also. But so, I mean, what was that like? Like, getting back on screen with him and acting opposite him and stuff? I mean.
It was great. It's been 17 years since McMullen and She's the One. For years we've been talking about trying to find something to do together. And it's, it's funny. We only have a handful of scenes in this film together. And we didn't get to have any like the repartee that we kind of like. So we are going to do the McMullen sequel, and I purposely sort of kept us at in separate corners in this film so that I could save some of that stuff for the McMullen sequel.
And you mentioned that. I mean, like we've seen, I've heard you say this before. You've seen that a lot of independent films have kind of done that, like the Richard Linklater Before Sunrise Before Sunset films, and Kevin Smith Clerks 2, and even we were just talking before, like not necessarily independent, but Judd Apatow spinning off from Knocked Up. I mean, so it's actually I think it's a great idea, and people like these characters, you might as well bring them back. I mean, so how far along are you on that, and like what's the status, I guess?
I've got almost the whole outline for the screenplay done, and I'm pretty religious about writing my outlines. So the outline for the most part is done. I have this other film that hopefully we'll shoot in the spring. So after that film, I'll go back in and write the script to McMullen. And 2015 is the 20th anniversary. So the thinking is we'll shoot it early 2014 and have it ready for 20 years later.
Right, which is nice.
Yeah, it'd be pretty cool.
I just saw Quentin Tarantino did a Playboy interview this week, I guess, hawking Django Unchained, and he was saying how he wants to do like maybe 3 more movies, and that's also kind of become in vogue with directors like Kevin Smith retired, Steven Soderbergh is retiring, Tarantino maybe will retire. I mean, do you ever think of that? Like, what kind of do you ever like I want to make this many films and give it up, or I mean, do you have tons of stories you want to continue to tell?
I have tons of stories I want to tell, and my stories are they're pretty small stories. I sometimes feel like I'm more of like the short story writer than the novelist. My filmmaking hero has always been Woody Allen, and I look at that career, and year after year he bangs another one out, and I think it's what I love is making movies. When I was a kid in film school, I wanted it so badly, and now that I get to do it. You have to fight tooth and nail to get these movies made. But man, when you do, there is no day that is as much fun as a day on set. So I've made some movies that have worked. I've made more than a few that haven't worked. but every one of the experiences has been, highlights of my life. So for me, it's less important the end result, and I guess the thing, it's much more about the process.
Right. And so, I mean, this maybe is not the. I mean, so do you have one that? What ones? Not to say what one didn't work, but I mean, what do you think is like your best? Like, do you ever look at them like, what's your best one? Is it too much of a Sophie's choice, or do you like this one? I really nailed. Like, this is the one.
I think the film, I'm always going to say the one that you're working on,
right?
Because it's your new girlfriend. But I think the one that, like when you sit down and you have your first idea of what a movie might be, and you have some images in your head. Sidewalks of New York is probably the film that I've made that I think sort of the film most closely resembles what I thought I was going to do.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. I think that's a great it's a great one, and I think that should get more play. It seems it's actually become very underrated, where it's like people don't think of it being, as maybe they should, because it's really great. So I think we're ready for some questions from the audience.
Just go ahead and raise your hand. We do have a microphone. We're going to bring the house lights up so we can see everybody. And I'll come right on over to you. So hand up. Oh, I see one all the way over on the left side in the second row. Coming on over. And we're just waiting for a thumbs up from our camera guy over there. There we go.
What's that about, right? Hey, Ed.
How you doing?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the experience of making doggy bags and that idea of going back to making shorts. And then if you could talk a little bit about, with this idea of digital distribution becoming, making it much more accessible for filmmakers, and the idea that audience attention spans in general are shrinking. Do you see any path forward where filmmakers are going to be able to monetize shorts, or is it still just a lost cause?
Yeah, I think it's a lost cause, unfortunately. I love short films, and I hadn't made a short film since, film school. But we did this thing last year for a short film called Doggy Bags, where there was a contest where people gave a movie pitch idea, and then based on the winning idea, I wrote a short script and got to work with McMullen. So a lot of fun, but just a good way to exercise your muscles. As far as digital distribution, it's funny. I just, getting some press in from this movie, and there was something that was a quote of mine from 2007. I'm talking about Purple Violets, and Purple Violets was the first movie that was ever released exclusively on iTunes. And in the quote, it was something that, I guess when we were doing press, all the people that I sat down with, the vast majority, 8 out of every 10 folks were like, are you kidding me? No one is ever going to watch a movie on their computer, let alone their phone. And that's 2007. So, here we are 5 years later. Obviously, that's not the case. So, if I could tell you where we're going to be in 5 years, I wouldn't be making micro-budgeted films, But I do think if you look at that dramatic shift and the fact that, people are much more comfortable and a lot of times prefer watching films at home. I don't know where it's going, but that clearly it's coming big time. So.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, I see in the back row. We'll go there, and then we'll have one right in front of him. I'm going to be right behind you.
Hi, Ed. I have a question about your process in writing your films. Do you arrive at the circumstance situationally? Do you go out and you know what you're writing for, or do you conjure that up in your head and just kind of factor it into your screenplay before the process of creating the entire experience?
Yeah, the vast majority of my screenplays, I usually write thinking about, it's like maybe one of three things. Sometimes it's just environment. A movie I made called No Looking Back, I really just wanted to write a movie about, a beachfront seaside town in the winter. And that's where I started. I didn't know where I was going. A lot of times it's just a singular character. As I think about Fitzgerald, really the one character that, when I sat down, I didn't know where I was going to go, but I've had this idea of a kid, I'm fucking 44, a guy who, his father walked out on the family, or his father had died, and he had to become sort of the patriarch for his siblings and had to sort of forego his own dreams in order to do the right thing. So a lot of times it'll start with a character. But then what I do is, as I said earlier, I do believe in outlining, and a pretty sort of extensive outline where it's almost, I break it into 3 acts. I outline every scene. I try and do bios of the characters and stuff that I know I'll never even use in the screenplay. The other thing that I'll do is, depending on maybe the theme that I want to explore or one of the situations, like Newlyweds, which was about a newlywed couple that were in their second marriages. I went out and just, if I was out to dinner or at a party, someone would inevitably say, "What are you working on?" I'd tell them, and they would say, "Oh, you should talk to that person." So I'm constantly going into like investigative reporter mode, picking people's brains to try and steal from their lives. And then only after I feel like I know the world and the characters inside out, then do you give yourself you give yourself the gift of writing dialogue. Because, the dialogue for me has always been the most fun. And the process for a first draft is anywhere between 3 and 6 months. So.
Do you, when you have all that backstory and stuff, do you end up giving that to the actors at all, or do you not like to cloud their heads with other stuff like too much information?
It really
maybe?
depends on the actor. It depends on the character. Sometimes I do, but a lot of times, my process with the actors, especially, the last 3 or 4 films, is because I've become friends with a lot of them and writing for them, I bring them in much earlier in the process. So, you have that sloppy first draft, which isn't really a first draft. I'll give it to them and say, all right, this is where I think I'm going. I think this is what's going on with your character. Disregard all the dialogue, that's sort of placeholder stuff. But let's talk about backstory, who she is, where she's going. And, I think the reason that, the last couple of films have felt maybe just a little bit more honest and real is the fact that, I have these actors sort of working with me, especially the actresses, making sure that those women feel authentic. And yes, a woman would react that way in that situation. She would speak that way. So that's part of it.
Any other questions?
We have time for 2 more questions. I see one right here in the 3rd row, and then we'll come up to the front after that.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering, when you're researching the other Irish American families or your friends, you found kind of the bigger the family, the more maybe lack of communication amongst siblings. And then they kind of have to confront those issues finally when the father comes back in the storyline, but otherwise it's a huge elephant in the room situation. Did you find that as a common theme with your friends when you were researching it, or is that something that you really want to address with Irish American families?
No, I don't think it's specific to an Irish American experience. I mean, we've taken the film out at a bunch of different film festivals, and folks come up to me all the time and they're like, "I'm not Irish, I'm not Catholic, and how the hell did you know what was going on in my family?" So I think families are families. It doesn't matter, where you're coming from. We all are dealing with the same, all the good stuff and all of the dysfunction, So it really, and this was a film where I didn't, as I was writing it, I didn't go out and do any research. I grew up, in a Irish, Italian, working class neighborhood, and, have been sitting on, these types of stories, situations, and characters for 15 years. So the minute I started writing, all of this stuff that I guess has been in my subconscious mind just started coming out, and a lot of it even from my own family. So
We've got our final question right here in the front row.
Hi, Ed.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. We're a newer production company, and our average budgets have been about $5,000, and I kind of wanted to see what kind of advice you can give us for starting out.
You're making short films, or?
Well, right now we're starting with shorts, and then my husband's been writing his full screenplay, so that's where we want to branch out to.
I mean, the thing that young filmmakers have that those of us who came up in the 90s did not have the same advantage is, when we made our low budget films, we shot on film. you guys have these incredible digital cameras now, and you can get a great looking image at almost no cost. So my advice would be just, keep your costs down, and at 5,000 you're keeping them down, but just keep making movies. I mean, the only way you learn how to make movies is by making movies. I know, I'm a much better filmmaker now because I've been doing this for a while. I only wish when I was a kid starting out that I had been able to just cut my teeth on making, I would have made dozens of 10-minute short films if I could get my hands on like a 5D. That wasn't an option. And, for you guys, it's the cost of, picking up a guitar and writing a song, or, sitting down and trying to write your first short story or poetry, or if you're a painter. I mean, the great thing that's happened is now it's the first time, in filmmaking history where making films doesn't have to be a capitalistic enterprise. Every other, generation filmmaker, kid out of film school, whatever, up until 2 years ago, if he was going to make a feature, he had to be thinking about a story that could at least make its budget back, because most times you needed millions of dollars. That's over. So you can go and make whatever story you need to tell. It might cost you $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Someone might want that money back. But there's, folks out there, think about what your tuition for film school over 4 years would be. Let's say you didn't go to film school, you took all that money, how many great films you could make. Something to think about.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Ed. Fitzgerald Family Christmas is out on VOD November 21st, and I believe it's theatrically out on December 7th. You should all check it out. It's really great. So
cool. Thank you very much.
So much for coming and everything. Thank you.